But it is the bombshell from Braverman that's ignited a new civil war within the Tory party. The ex-Home Secretary has mauled Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in an extraordinary letter this evening, blasting him for weak leadership. Your rejection of this path was not merely a betrayal of our agreement, she says, but a betrayal of your promise to the nation that you would do whatever it takes to stop the boats. You have manifestly and repeatedly failed to deliver on every single one of these key policies. Either your distinctive style of government means you are incapable of doing so, or, as I must now surely conclude, you never had any intention of keeping your promises. Ouch. Well, joining me now in the studio is Daily Telegraph's deputy comment editor, Annabel Denham. Annabel, I think if anyone had written that about you or me, who you had just fired, you'd probably find yourself having a bit of a sticky night, not really sleeping, wouldn't you?
You certainly would. This feels like a very personal attack on Rishi Sunak's character, not the kind of attack that we've seen previously. Of course, he's been accused of being a technocrat, of being too managerialist, of focusing too much on the data, not really leading, not going for it with his gut.
Yeah.
But this is about his integrity. This is the suggestion that he could be doing something about these issues, and he's choosing not to. And one line that really stood out for me was when she talked about him trying to minimise political risk.
Yes.
As though Rishi Sunak's sort of guiding philosophy is the idea that he doesn't want to be too unpopular. He doesn't want Conservative backbenchers to be coming after him, and he's choosing the path of least resistance. And that, to me, is really very damaging
And
indeed.
she makes a couple of more than strong hints that he's really only doing the job because he wants to be in the job. He's not doing it because he believes in anything. She's more or less accusing him of using her to get to the job because in order for her to sort of be convinced things would happen if he gave her the job. You know, things would happen with Boris Johnson, other things would happen around other figures in the party. And she's basically accusing him of letting her down, of lying to her, and of lying to everybody else.
I think a lot of people are going to feel very let down at the moment. I suspect, actually, Mike, that the country has shifted quite far towards the right over the last few weeks, ever since people have looked on, many of them appalled at the protests that have been taking place every weekend, not least on Armistice Day. In terms of Rishi Sunak and what is driving him now, I think that when he came into power, he wanted to be a good loser. I think he knew that the chances that the Tories were going to win the next general election were extremely slim, and he wanted to minimise the losses and perhaps come out of it with his personal reputation intact. Now, a few months ago, we saw him slightly break away from that with some of the rowing back or watering down of the net zero policies, perhaps looking as though he might get tougher on immigration. Now,
but it was almost like
it
was almost like he put his toe in the water and he got sort of slapped around a bit behind closed doors by the people who don't want the Tory party to move to the right. They don't want it to be the Boris Johnson sort of populist party. But there's more bad news from tonight. There's a poll out tonight, apparently just been released, in which it shows Reform are on 11%. And actually, you know, a very small number now behind the Tories, in single digits very possibly behind the Tories, and possibly on track for getting as many votes as UKIP got that time, when they only, to be fair, got one seat, but they got an awful lot of votes. So there's definitely a move to the right in the country.
There's a very real risk that the next general election will be absolutely catastrophic for the Conservative Party, that they could be left with something like 100 seats, if not less, and that at the same time we're going to see Reform becoming a serious contender. You know, for a long time people have asked why it is that the UK doesn't have a populist party of its own. We've looked overseas to European nations where we've seen the rise of the far right in many cases and scratched our heads and wondered when the same thing was going to come here. Now, part of the reason for the delay, of course, was the Brexit referendum and how that slightly scratched the itch. But now the real question is, what will the nature of the losses be at the next general election? Is it going to be most damaging in the red wall or in the blue wall? And I think if the Tories retain more blue wall seats, if they can fend off the challenge from the Liberal Democrats, then they will remain this centrist, a lot of people call them a wet Tory party, and that will give real opportunity for a Reform or another party to rise up. There is alternatively a possibility where they retain more red wall seats, and what that means is that the Tories themselves could become almost a populist party.
Yes, they could, but I think the trouble is at the moment, certainly from what Suella Braverman's been saying, they don't really have the heart for that. They certainly don't have the heart for that with Rishi Sunak, but maybe they have the heart for that with her at the helm. I mean, do you think that she's positioning herself to come back after the election loss, hoping that she will be the next leader? Do you think that's her game?
I think it's very difficult to see this as anything other than her putting her marker in the sand and setting out her stall for the country, for what perhaps a Tory party with Suella as their leader might look like. Now, the concern for Suella, I imagine, is that the support she's had really from the parliamentary party hasn't been that robust. Of course, we've had the New Conservatives coming out today and saying that they're worried that the Red Wall is being abandoned by Rishi Sunak, but that's more about the ideology of the Conservative Party and the direction it's going in than Rishi Sunak's treatment of Suella Braverman. And I suspect that she's less popular, has less support than perhaps she was anticipating. And there's the other concern for her that actually we're still quite a long way from a general election. Now, you could argue that this means she can wash her hands of everything that happens over the next 12 months, but you could also say that in 12 months' time, if a week isn't a long time in politics, people are slightly going to have forgotten who Suella Braverman was.
I mean, there is that chance, I suppose. A lot of people have said to me this week, though, surely to heavens they can't last a year like this because they're literally eating themselves. And the Tories are famously good at getting re-elected. They're famously good at getting rid of leaders when they need to. It seems to me it may be past the point where somebody's going to say, but is Rishi Sunak really the guy? I mean, I don't know who the hell they're going to bring back in. Hopefully not David Cameron, because all these people who keep saying to me, oh, David Cameron, very well respected internationally, great Prime Minister. I mean, his rating as a Prime Minister is actually very much on the low side. I mean, he's not remembered as a great Prime Minister at all, is my view.
It's difficult to see the David Cameron appointment as anything other than dead cat strategy.
Yeah.
They knew that Suella Braverman was going to be hitting the headlines. Rishi obviously has been under pressure for days to sack her. He knew he was finally going to take that decision. He wanted to do something diverting that was going to distract people, distract the media from the Suella story. But it was extraordinarily short-sighted because 24 hours later, of course, we've had this scathing resignation letter from Suella Braverman, possibly even, maybe not that surprising, but possibly even worse than Rishi Sunak was expecting. And now here they are, they're going to wake up tomorrow morning, the cold light of day, with David Cameron as their foreign secretary, who's got to deal with major issues, Ukraine, the Middle East, when his track record on foreign policy is not especially glowing.
It's terrible. And also the other thing is that, you know, all the things that she said and the things that she wrote in the Times came out to be true. You know, the idea that she was sort of breaking ranks and that he didn't have faith in her after saying that he did, I can see that. But the point is that all the things that she said would happen, did happen. And they weren't sort of, as a result of what she said, they were going to happen anyway. And we've got another Palestinian rally tomorrow, the first one, I think, on a Wednesday, where they're going to go and parade around Westminster by presumably the thousands, maybe tens of thousands. They're going to be calling for a ceasefire inside the House of Commons for people to vote for that. You know, this isn't going away anytime soon, and Rishi has done nothing. I mean, there was a headline on the front page of the Times on Monday saying he's going to get the police to crack down on these anti-Semites. Well, so far, I think they've arrested about 8 people. There's clearly a lot more to go.
It's a pretty damning indictment of British politics, I think, that you can be sacked for being right.
Yeah.
There's certainly a strong case to be made that Suella has been right all along about these protests. And I've always felt that she's politically been quite useful to Rishi Sunak because she's been able to come out and say things that he perhaps as Prime Minister has been unable to. Now, you can argue whether as Home Secretary she was the right person to make these points. But nonetheless, there is a large contingent of British people who are very uncomfortable when they see the scenes at the protests on their television screens, when they hear chants of jihad, and they feel as though the political elite are just brushing it off. They're not taking it adequately seriously. And Suella was at least speaking to those people, even if her remarks didn't have much in the way of practical significance. And now that Rishi Sunak has lost her, I wonder if the Tories' only option actually is to have a tougher policy. Perhaps it will be tomorrow that they decide we're going to leave the ECHR. But they felt as though they couldn't do that with Suella, the loose cannon, in charge of the Home Office.
Even though she's saying that she provided them with ways of doing things, she showed them how it could be done, she showed them what the path would be, but she's basically now accusing him of doing nothing other than wasting everybody's time, because if they do turn around tomorrow, the Supreme Court, and say, sorry, you can't do this, they'll have wasted basically a year and a half, a load of money, a load of conversations, and there'll be no further on.